All right. Well, welcome and thank you for joining the Landfill Emissions Reduction Grant public information webinar. Before we get started, I'm going to go over some housekeeping tips. The first tip is to maximize your browser window to make sure that you can see all of the controls. Your audio is controlled by the device you are using to join the webinar. If you are experiencing trouble with audio, turn up the audio on the device that you are using and make sure your volume is not muted. We are using the Zoom webinar platform. You will be able to hear me and hear the other DEQ panelists, and you will be able to see the presentation only, similar to a TV broadcast. However, you can engage with the DEQ team by sending in questions through the Q&A function. This webinar will be recorded and posted to the DEQ webpage. The PowerPoint will also be posted and made available on the webpage. Attendees can show subtitles by clicking the closed caption icon located on the toolbar on the bottom of the screen. If you don't see a closed caption icon, it may be located under the More icon in the bottom of the screen. Once clicked, the Show Subtitle option in the pop-up list. You can turn on and off subtitles from there. Attendees can ask questions by first clicking the More icon located on the toolbar on the bottom of the screen. Next, select the Q&A icon. A Submit a Question prompt will pop open, and you can type in your question into the prompt and click Send to submit to the DEQ team. The questions will be read by a meeting facilitator and directed to the panelists during the Q&A portion of the webinar. We will do our best to answer questions during the Q&A portion today. However, there may be questions that are dependent on project-specific conditions. If we are unable to answer your question during the webinar, we will follow up with a response once available via email. If there are questions today with answers that are not already available on the DEQ webpage or in the request for grant proposal, we will update that information so that it is available for everyone to access. This is a QR code that will take you to a landing page that has a list of resources that will be referenced today. In addition to the QR code list, all of the resources that will be mentioned during the webinar can be found on the DEQ webpage or in the request for grant proposal solicitation package, which is posted to the DEQ webpage. And I'll leave this screen up for just a moment in the event you would like to access that QR code. So with that, I will introduce the DEQ panel that we have here today. I'm Ali Buccini, Climate Grant Analyst with Oregon DEQ, and I'll be guiding you through today's presentation. I'm joined by our panel of technical content experts who will address your specific questions during the Q&A portion of the webinar. Heather Kawapamaki, Clean Air Oregon project engineer and air quality content expert. Tim Spencer, solid waste engineer and solid waste content expert. And Daniel Reddick, natural resource specialist and sampling and analysis content expert. Please see the agenda for today. The first portion of this webinar will be presenting information on the grant program, later followed by the Q&A portion. We will start with introducing the background of the Landfill Emissions Reduction Grant, discuss scope and eligibility. Then my colleagues will share the technical requirements of the grant. Next, we will go over application and funding information and the scoring criteria and evaluation process. Last, we will have the Q&A that we have dedicated roughly 25 minutes for holding. So I'm going to start us off by sharing background context on how this program came to exist. Oregon is already experiencing the devastating effects of climate change. Extreme weather events, chronic heat, drought, flooding, and intense wildfires are impacting everyone in Oregon. In March of 2020, Governor Brown signed Executive Order 2004, directing DEQ to take actions necessary to reduce methane gas emissions from landfills. This is one component of a broader directive for Oregon state agencies to take action to reduce and regulate greenhouse gas emissions towards meeting reduction goals of at least 45% below 1990 emissions levels by the year 2035. Achieving these reductions requires enormous effort and investment throughout Oregon's economy and landscape. Oregon's Climate Equity and Resilience Through Action, also known as CERTA program, is a $197 million federal grant that was awarded to DEQ in 2024. This is a huge and unique multi-agency effort that aligns with the state's goal of creating transformative approaches to tackling the climate crisis. Partner agencies include the Oregon Department of Energy, the Energy Trust of Oregon, Housing and Community Services, Oregon Department of Transportation, the Oregon Health Authority, and the Department of Administrative Services. CERTA expects to reduce greenhouse gas by the equivalent of 6.6 million metric tons across multiple sectors between the years 2026 and 2050. Each of the projects on the screen represents a separate program that has their own processes and funding opportunities. The Landfill Emissions Reduction Grant is one of the 12 programs under CERTA, and you can see it outlined here in red. The Landfill Emissions Reduction Grant will fund methane mitigation projects at landfills in Oregon. Landfills are a large source of methane emissions, and in the absence of any new efforts, those emissions are projected to grow. Approximately $6.3 million is available in funding for a wide range of projects that meet the eligibility criteria. The application period is now open, and the application deadline is February 27th, 2026. I'll be sharing more key dates later in the presentation. Municipal solid waste and industrial waste landfills can apply. Projects will be prioritized by their cost-effective greenhouse gas reduction. That is their greenhouse gas reduction in metric tons of CO2 equivalent per dollar. Projects must meet the eligibility criteria of either a Type 1 or a Type 2 project. For Type 1, those projects are at any landfill in Oregon that results in methane emissions reductions above and beyond what is required by all applicable federal and state air quality and solid waste regulations. This is for any landfill, either public or private, in Oregon that has a project above and beyond applicable regulations. For Type 2, those are exclusively projects at municipal solid waste landfills that have a design capacity less than 2.5 million megagrams or 2.5 million cubic meters and are not a major source of HAPs or collocated with a major source of HAPs. Project funds must be used to comply and to exceed applicable requirements of Oregon's landfill gas requirements, OAR Chapter 340 Division 239. In addition, the applicant must demonstrate that it complies with applicable state solid waste regulations. Noting that tribal nations are not subject to state requirements and therefore would be considered for Type 1 projects. Applicants will have to provide a regulatory analysis demonstrating their eligibility for either a Type 1 or a Type 2 project. For more information on applicable regulations to review, please visit the DEQ webpage and the request for grant proposal, which is also posted on the DEQ webpage. Eligible projects may include, but are not limited to, fine-tuning of existing gas collection systems, gas collection and control at landfills in cases where it is not otherwise required, or the expansion of an existing gas collection system to one or more uncontrolled areas at the site, enhancement of oxidation layers, enhancement of automation of gas control systems, diversion of more landfill gas to a gas to energy facility, or operational or design modifications at the landfill that minimize the creation of methane in the landfill. Also noting that waste diversion activities are not eligible because these activities are upstream of landfill methane generation. Applicants must be eligible entities that own or operate the landfill where the methane mitigation technology or equipment will be installed. This includes private entities, tribal nations, nonprofit entities, and public entities, as you can see listed here. Technology, service, utility, engineering, construction, or contractor companies who do not own or operate the landfill are not eligible to apply directly. These entities may partner with applicants to support the application and may be identified in the proposal as a co-applicant. If there is an existing legal partnership between the primary applicant and the co-applicant, documentation of the legal agreement must be shared. If awarded, the primary applicant will be responsible for all project completion and reporting responsibilities. It is not necessary to have a supporting organization be an official co-applicant, though there are some benefits. There would be more streamlined communication for questions, and they would also be on the DEQ email list for communications related to the grant. Any entity that is excluded, disqualified, or debarred from receiving federal assistance on the federal suspension and debarment list is not eligible. And with that, I will hand off the technical requirements portion of our webinar to the technical content experts, starting with Heather sharing the modeling data requirements.
Thanks, Allie. Hey, everybody. I know I've been introduced, but just introduce myself again. I'm Heather Kwapamaki. I'm an engineer at DEQ's Air Quality Program. And I'm going to start off the discussion on some of the technical requirements for this. The first one is we are going to require some modeling. Since this grant is looking at reductions in greenhouse gas, that kind of means that we need to be able to compare what the greenhouse gas emissions would be like without the proposed project or technology against what the potential greenhouse gas emissions would be with that technology, so that we can look at that difference. We also want to make sure that we can compare projects kind of on an apples to apples basis as much as possible, knowing that landfills can be pretty unique structures. So with that, we're requiring all applicants to do an initial modeling of what the greenhouse gas emissions would be with and without the proposed project or proposed intervention. And we're requiring them to be done using equations laid out in federal regulations, Part 98, and that's part of the greenhouse gas reporting regulations. There's two subparts. They're pretty much the same equations, but either subpart HH for municipal landfills or TT for an industrial, and that will sort of give us a good apples to apples comparison. But then knowing that while these equations do capture a lot of what we see at landfills, there's just some projects that might really not be represented well, or just landfills that you might have on-site specific data kind of showing the actual emissions are different. So we are allowing optionally kind of site-specific historical emissions data from the facility for part of that as is information. And then also if you have sort of alternative calculations showing proposed reductions that are different than, you know, what you might get out of the Part 98 equations, we'll allow those as well, so that we can kind of incorporate just some of the fine-tune differences in landfills that we tend to see. You know, we're promoting, you know, use of different technologies. We're not trying to be prescriptive. We want it to leave it up to all of you to decide what what technology might work the best. But we do need justification of the technology. So we need some justification, you know, that whatever you're proposing can work, should work, you know, case studies, journal articles, like we have listed up here, showing that it is, at least there's a reasonable expectation that it will work, and that it will work specifically at the site. We're not asking for final design concepts or final designs of any way, but we do want sort of some initial thoughts and looking at how it's going to work with the site, with some justification that it's kind of appropriate for the site. And additionally, we need to know potential useful life of equipment. You know, if the equipment really is only going to last for 10 years, we can only count the methane reductions from that equipment for those 10 years. So we need to sort of know how long it'll last so that we can include that in our comparison. So that's my bit. I am going to now hand it over to Tim Spencer, and I think he's going to talk a little bit more about permitting requirements for these.
Thanks, Heather. Greetings, everyone. These DEQ permitting and design requirements should look familiar to you since you encounter them whenever you make significant changes at your landfill, such as adding a new disposal cell, a new landfill gas flare, expanding the landfill gas control system, or in the case of old closed landfills, redevelopment of all or part of the landfill property. This technical documentation may be intended to address air quality permitting requirements and solid waste permitting requirements, or only solid waste requirements if your landfill doesn't need an air quality permit, for example. If you're awarded a grant, you can use grant funds to cover the costs for permitting related work that you have to do. And construction of your emissions reduction projects. An example of complex projects include installation of a complete landfill gas control system or expansion of an existing system of that type. A simpler project might be something passive like a bio cover. The more complex projects will require more engineering involvement. And some projects, the simpler ones, may not need an engineering expertise at all. Next up, Daniel Reddick will highlight requirements for monitoring and the associated sampling and analysis plan.
Thank you, Tim. Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here. The Sampling and Analysis Plan, or SAP, defines the procedures, responsibilities, quality controls, and data management practices required to ensure that greenhouse gas data collected are scientifically valid, legally defensible, and meet the project's quality objectives. DEQ provides a SAP template in the request for grant proposal document. And in that proposal, applicants must describe to the best of their abilities at the date of the proposal submission how the project emissions reductions will be measured. And that includes a description of the emissions reductions estimation method and all applicable measurements, monitoring, sampling, and analysis. And if awarded for the grant, as the first task of the project, the successful applicant will be responsible for submitting a sampling and analysis plan or a SAP within the first 60 to 90 days of the subaward agreement execution. The timeline will depend on the complexity of the project within that 60 to 90 days. If a submitted SAP does not meet the standards for DEQ approval, the successful applicant will be required to resubmit the SAP to receive DEQ approval. And a SAP that doesn't receive DEQ approval after the submission deadline may result in termination of the funding agreement and cost recovery. The applicant can invoice DEQ for eligible project expenses, which includes completion of the SAP upon DEQ's approval and finalized SAP. Approval of a finalized SAP. The successful applicant will be responsible for submitting greenhouse gas data to DEQ on the schedule outlined in the request for grant proposals. And next, Allie will discuss the application process and funding.
Thank you, Daniel. So how do you apply for this grant opportunity? First, we recommend that all interested applicants thoroughly read the request for grant proposal, also known as the RFGP. Please also read the appendices and the resources found in the solicitation package. The solicitation package can be found on the DEQ webpage. Applications must be submitted through the DEQ grants management system called WebGrants. The DEQ webpage has a WebGrants registration guidebook to help you set up your account in our grants management system. This can also be found on the DEQ webpage. Next, applicants have the option of submitting a pre-closing technical review application. This is due December 15th, 2025. DEQ will offer a technical feedback matrix that will be shared back to the applicant by January 29th, 2026. Again, this is an optional pre-closing technical review that is offered to all applicants. After the closing date, DEQ will be unable to provide technical feedback on the grant applications. So if you would like technical feedback, you should take advantage of the opportunity to participate in the pre-closing technical review process. The application closing date is February 27th, 2026. And for funding, a landfill may apply for multiple projects. There is a maximum request limit of $3.1 million per landfill for either one or for multiple projects that in sum total 3.1 million. If a landfill does apply for multiple projects, each project must have a separate and complete proposal submitted, and each project will be scored separately. We have approximately 6.3 million in total funds available to be awarded through the program, and DEQ is anticipating awarding 2 to 6 projects. So that leads us to the scoring criteria. There are 105 possible points, including 5 bonus points. Project work plan, timeline, and scope has 25 possible points. Here, we will evaluate that the project work plan, timeline, and scope are clearly articulated, feasible, and comprehensive. The budget has 10 possible points. Here we will evaluate that the budget aligns with the proposal narrative and requirements and provides a clear description of all expenditures. Innovation is 5 possible points. This is for projects that have creative approaches or technologies that have demonstrated potential to enhance methane mitigation efforts at other landfills. There's also a type 1 project bonus of 5 points for projects that qualify as type 1. And then, as you can see, a majority of the points will be for cost-effective greenhouse gas reduction. There are 60 points possible here. This is an assessment of cost effectiveness as defined as greenhouse gas emissions reductions through 2050 divided by funds requested, or metric tons of CO2 equivalent per dollar. The qualifying proposal with the highest cost effectiveness will receive 60 points, while other proposals will receive fewer than 60 points in proportion to their cost effectiveness relative to the most cost effective proposal. Our final slide of the presentation is the schedule for the program. One thing to note is that in addition to these public info sessions, DEQ will also be hosting technical support office hours during the week of November 17th, 2025. This will not have a formal presentation like the info session, but it will provide support on project-specific technical aspects of the grant. And prior registration is required. The registration link will be uploaded to the DEQ webpage and shared with our GovDelivery email list once available. And if you haven't yet, please head on over to the DEQ webpage to sign up for the GovDelivery email list there. So going through this list, you can see that the posting of the RFP was September 15th. Again, it is now live. Today, you are participating in one of 2 scheduled public information meetings. We will be hosting another one on October 14th, 2025 at 6 p.m. Again, those technical support office hours will be the week of November 17th. Questions or requests for clarification will be due November 14th, 2025. Oops, let me go back. The pre-closing technical review will be due December 15th, 2025. Again, that is an optional process. And the closing, which means the date that the application is due, is February 27th, 2026. DEQ anticipates submitting the issuance of notice of intent to award in May of 2026. The anticipated subaward agreement execution will be October of 2026. The project end date, which is when this project will end, is May 30th, 2029. And the closeout of award, which is when the final invoicing and reporting will take place, is July 15th, 2029. So that concludes the presentation portion of the webinar. We can now transition to the Q&A. And if you haven't yet, please submit your questions using the Q&A functionality in the Zoom. So Cade, do we have any questions submitted?
There are no questions that have been submitted at this time, no.
Okay, great. I might offer the participants another minute or two to submit questions. And if you have questions that you think of at a later time, you can also email your questions to this email right here. That is lerg@deq.oregon.gov. Okay, have any questions been submitted?
No questions at this time.
Okay, well, great. Thank you for attending today. I hope that it was helpful. And again, this webinar will be posted to the DEQ webpage for you to view at a later date if you would like. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.